prediction of the settlement of a pile and assessment seismic soil pile interaction and analytical investigation is my research topic I would like to present now. Abstract. In this study, the settlement of pile and prediction settlement of pile has been investigated with considering seismic loading in two different directions, X direction and Y directions. One time, seismic loading was applied to the pile in X direction, and one time it was applied to the pile in Y direction. To minimize analytical process, the important peak of seismic loading extracted and this process supports to minimize analytical process, and in statistical analysis to estimate accuracy of the analytical outcome, different statistical models were applied for distribution probability of the settlement, and results show the direction of seismic loading is important in settlement prediction of the pile. It suggested analytical method minimized analytical process and the present method can apply to many problems of nonlinear dynamic. Introduction. The pile required to construct for enhancement stability of infrastructure or skyscraper when they are subjected to the nonlinear lateral loading. The main objective of this investigation are to minimize analytical process and prediction settlement mechanism, and understand distribution probability of settlement pile when pile is subjected to the seismic loading. Brief methodology was used in this investigation is first flowchart is starting with modeling, then analysis using simple formula is presenting here based on settlement, seismic loading, pile geometry, and settlement coefficient and modulus elasticity of the soil. Then seismic loading, 2 times seismic loading were applied to the pile. First, seismic loading, whole seismic loading was recorded from the earthquake station, and second, just selected peak of seismic loading. Then analytical process is made, and finally statistical modeling applied to the results for assessment and verification. The geometry of the pile is shown in figure. The geometry pile is 0.3 into 0.3 with length of 18 meter. And the loading is the seismic loading is in two directions. Whole seismic loading, but one time whole seismic loading was applied on pile at each different direction, and at the second stage only peak selected and applied on pile for seismic analysis. Result: the settlement in X direction and Y directions. In X direction, when seismic loading was applied to the pile, the settlement according to whole seismic loading is shown. Then settlement according to peak seismic loading in both direction X and the Y. At each one, when we apply peak of seismic loading to the pile, it shows two different settlements. Result: the results show the direction of seismic loading is important in settlement prediction of the pile. In the calculation settlement, the suggested analytical method minimizes the analytical process for calculation settlement of the pile. Based on the peak seismic loading, two statistical models have been developed here. First for the X direction and second is for Y direction. Red line is the reference line and lower and upper percentage of displacement is shown in the picture, and also expected normal value for displacement. X direction and Y direction show two different settlement, two different mechanisms of settlement. Histogram. Histogram is used for understanding frequency of the settlement in X and the Y direction. There is no similarity in X and Y direction in terms of this seismic settlement. In both cases are non-linear settlement or differential settlement, but in two different mechanisms. The range of the settlement. The range of the settlement in X direction and the range of settlement in the Y direction. Here it's shown two different frequency and magnitude for the settlement in X and Y direction. Assessment. Based on the prediction and percentage of settlement, the settlement in X direction is not same as Y direction. The histogram for settlement showed the settlement magnitude at each direction has repeated differently. The differential displacement occur with two different mechanisms. Conclusion. We had a pile with introduced geometry. Seismic load was applied to pile, and the peak seismic load also was applied to the pile. The analytical process made, and I tried to minimize analytical process, the settlement, prediction of settlement frequency, and settlement mechanism investigated, and application. The suggested analytical method minimizes the analytical process for calculation settlement of the pile. The presented method in this study can apply to many problems of nonlinear dynamics. Its reference was used. Thank you for attention. If you have any question, you can contact me on this email.